Hey, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I'm happy that you're joining me today. I am Jim Harrison, essential oil expert, doing it for about 30 years. And I think I've done pretty much everything you can do with aromatherapy and essential oils. But I have to tell you, you never get jaded. There's always another step, there's always another way to go. And as usual, that's what I'm going to be presenting today in this webinar. I'm going to tell you about one of the one of the processes that I've taken over the years. So let me just clean up my screen, get rid of a few things here, and get right to what we're going to be talking about. Okay. There we go. Okay, how about this? I'm going to be talking to you about what I'm calling the directed sensory method. Now, this is a process that over the years I've developed, and the way that I ended up here, it's really interesting. Let me start from what essential oils are to me, what I've developed over the years. And again, what I said is that I think I've done pretty much everything you can possibly do in essential oils. The only things I really haven't done is distillation and the GC analysis. Everything else, I think I've been there. And through that process, I've really learned a lot about essential oils. And so, as most of us have, started out in essential oils, we look at the chemistry. We look at the properties. Lavender does what? Peppermint, chamomile, rosemary. We learn these. Mostly what we learn first is, what do I use this oil for? And so the process really starts at using the oil, experiencing the oil. It's the way to go. It's the way I teach it as well. And that is what essential oils do. Now, when you start working with essential oils, you will find, just like everyone is fine, sometimes they don't work. And we have to understand why they work, of course, why they work. You're probably not going to do very well if you don't understand that a little bit at least. But we also have to understand why they don't work. And this is the development or really the process that I'm going to talk about today, or one of the places I landed due to the process of, I know why they work. Why didn't it work then, if it's supposed to work? Essential oils are one of those things that, I don't know if I should use the word elusive, but they can be a little bit elusive. It's just like the reasons are in reach, but you can't quite get to it. And then you go through the science and, this whole idea of what's called evidence-based aromatherapy or evidence-based essential oils. I go to the studies. I'm always looking at studies and reading up on the studies and finding out, there's certain properties that we understand. Why does that happen? Well, the study says that, interact with the cellular structure or this, physiological activity in the body, the nervous system, whatever. And we can understand that in a lab study. That's cool. That's what we call evidence-based. We found it in study or in a clinical work. If in a clinical situation, use the essential oil, you find that it works, you use that again in that same clinical situation and you find that it works. But hey, as I already mentioned, sometimes it doesn't work. And that's the area that I'm always most interested in. What I'm going to be talking about today with this system that I've developed, I call the directed sensory method. It's about how language affects the result, how the environment affects the result, the scent, the aroma, not the chemistry of the essential oil scent or aroma. Olfactory response. I can't even leave it at olfactory response. There's a lot to the scent, and I'll bring that up. And then the sensory experience. What do I mean by that? Well, all of this is a sensory experience. Now, I'm going to be talking about this from an essential oil perspective, but this really pertains to any therapeutic practice. Actually, this is life. I'm going to be talking about how we respond from a sensory perspective to life, to a therapist, to essential oils. That's the game today. That's what we're going to do. So let's start this off by looking at this statement that I make. The treatment begins before the treatment begins. Just sounds cool, doesn't it? I mean, that's why I wrote it. It sounds cool. But now I have to come up with a reason why it makes sense, because it does. The treatment really does begin before the treatment begins. And so instead of it being the treatment beginning before the treatment begins, I want to show you different ways that you begin the treatment from what you would traditionally think is the start of a treatment. So let me pull this up a little bit closer for you so you can really see what I'm saying here. This environment is, you can look at it and think, okay, if this is a treatment room, what is this? Okay, what are we looking at here? And from that perspective, this is partly where the treatment begins. I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that, but every moment, and this is what we really need to understand, is what I wrote here. Every moment, your nervous system is processing information. It's processing that environment right there. It's processing everything that's going on in that environment. And I'm going to break that down to each category to explain how that works and how we're going to work with it, is really what I want to talk about. How do we work with this treatment begins before the treatment begins aspect? So there's just thousands of signals that we are responding to, that your guests are responding to, your clients are responding to, that it's who we are. We're sensory beings. And it's how we communicate, and it's how we survive, and it's how we relate to everything in our environment. So the directed sensory method, what we're going to be doing is I want to show you how to orchestrate. Instead of all this information being random, I want to help you to observe this information, and not only observe it, but actually use it as part of your treatment, because it already is. You can't dismiss it. Can't go without it, because the signals that shape the experience are part of the therapy. Now, let's look at the nervous system, because the nervous system starts receiving information. Now, I mean, I'm calling it the nervous system, but the nervous system is pretty much everything. Visually, it's a response to the nervous system as well. The brain and your visual cortex and everything else. But the nervous system is also responding to that. What the scents are, what the ambient sounds are, everything. Your body is starting to process that. And so all of these things are starting to shape the experience. And so when we look at this, the environment, I mentioned that. I'm going to be mentioning it more, of course. And the therapist. And then when you look at these bullet points, the environment. So if you look at this image, right, the environment, this is spa design. This is architecture, because we're designing so that it creates a feeling, so it creates an aura, so it creates an image. So it gives the message of, what is this space you are entering? What does it feel like? What do we want it to communicate? This is what spa design, or any design, is all about. And again, I'm going to take that a little bit further than the way we generally accept or think about it. Now, the therapist is really important. I want to give you a few levels of how I look at the therapist as part of the sensory experience that the guest is taking on and turning into the treatment before the treatment begins. And right after the bullet point, the therapist, you see communication. Now, you would think that when I'm talking about the therapist and I'm talking about communication, I am. That's not only it, because I'm also talking about the way that the therapist looks, the glow or lack of glow in their eyes, their posture, their presence. There's a thing I do about knowledge. I think I have this posted up on LinkedIn as a newsletter. And in some scientific evaluation, knowledge, and when I'm talking about knowledge, I'm not talking about the communication aspect, okay? That's why I'm separating therapist and communication. I'm not talking about the communication of what your knowledge is. I'm talking about the presence of knowledge. What you learn is actually perceived by people even without you communicating it. That needs a lot more detail. Look up that newsletter that I have on LinkedIn, and you'll be able to read a little bit more about the science that backs that up. So knowledge, who you are, your presentation, everything about you, your confidence, all of that is part of your treatment before what you consider your treatment beginning. Okay. This actually gets into which, I'm just thinking about this now. Therapist burnout. A guest can perceive therapist burnout, and that can create a negative response in the guest before the treatment begins, which again, that negative response is communicating as part of the treatment. So we want to be aware of everything about who you are, how you're presenting yourself, how you're walking into that space. Okay. That's the therapist part. There's more to it, but I kind of gave you an overview. And then communication. Yes, communication is really important. I'm going to talk about language. Language is powerful. We know that, in all the self-help, self-health, meditation, intentions, manifestation, all these things. They talk about language, the words you use. And that is extremely important. I'm going to talk about the impact that has, especially in conjunction with essential oils. It's amazing. And so communication, yes, you want to really pay attention to the words, your tone, the way you're speaking, everything about the communication is part of the therapy. Now, scent, that's a category we're going to get into. It has a lot more depth than most people think. Touch, this is again, therapist, communication. Touch is also part of that. And especially in the therapy, but even before you start any of your work, how you communicate through touch is important. And then expectation. And expectation actually begins before the guest enters the space. Expectation begins with with the guest looking for a treatment. So already they have a goal in mind. They have a focus in mind. They have a result in mind. And as they go through the website or whatever it is, the brochures, whatever they're looking at to find who you are, what your whole, system is for treatment, there's an expectation. The expectation changes, evolves with everything I just mentioned. The environment, the therapist and their presentation, their communication, the touch, the scent that's in the air. All of these things become part of that expectation, because if their expectation is one thing and they walk into an environment, a scent, ambient sounds that doesn't jive with that expectation, it's going to either shift that person into an altered expectation, or it could challenge on how they think about what's going to happen once they've entered this space. Their expectations are not being met just through these things I just mentioned. This is something I learned from, this is an interesting guy. I'm not sure what he does, a psychologist maybe. Amir Zar, Amirzar. And he wrote a book called The Suggestible Brain. And in that book, he talks about suggestion and the power of suggestion. This is when I get into language. I'm going to include how powerful suggestion is, how powerful your language is. And suggestion isn't only language. Suggestion is your visible communication. Everything I just mentioned, it's all part of the suggestion. It's creating what people are going to expect, or what people are being tuned to respond to. Suggestion and being tuned to respond are kind of, I'm using those as the same thing. Now, here's the cool thing I learned from this book is top-down signaling and bottom-up signaling. We generally think about bottom-up. So in relationship to essential oils, I'm going to use lavender because lavender works on the central nervous system that, calms and reduces spasms and blah, 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 all the things that it does. That is bottom up. That's chemistry. That's the physiological, biological, pharmacological-like response to the chemistry of the essential oil. Bottom up. Top down is actually what we really need to pay attention to, because everything I mentioned is top-down signaling. So your top-down signaling, let me bring that up a little bit closer here. Your top-down signaling, language, expectation, meaning, attention, interpretation. These are all the things that I was just talking about. Your bottom-up signaling is the scent, even though the scent can become part of the top-down signaling. Again, I'm going to get into that. So bottom-up signaling, scent, receptors, physiology, touch, sensory input, this is all part of the treatment experience, and it's emerging. This is very important to understand. These top-down signalings, language, expectation, meaning, attention, are part of the therapy. The bottom up, the scent, the receptors, physiology, touch, all the sensory input. That's physically that you would, when we talk about evidence-based, those are the things we look at in a lab. We can't separate those two. And that's one of my issues with evidence-based, thinking, is that evidence is only as good as the conditions in the lab setting or in the clinical setting. If the top-down signaling changes, your evidence-based theories are no longer relevant. They're still there because they're the bottom up. But if you don't think about the top-down signaling, you're missing the entire structure. The word holistic could be used here. Because when we think holism, I can say that word right, holism. When we think being holistic, we generally think, the bottom up. We're going to address the nervous system. We're going to address the digestive system. We're going to address this, that, and the other thing from a bottom up perspective. But we forget holistic also includes the environment, includes the words that you're using, includes the scent, atmospheric scent, the ambient sounds, includes everything. Everything is all part of this system. So the most important part about the directed sensory method is incorporating both top-down influence and bottom-up. That is a complete therapeutic process. So top-down signaling, these are things starting to get a little repetitive here, which is very important because we need to really lock this in on the system that I'm talking about here. So top-down signaling, the person is already looking at the website. Their expectation from what they read to making the appointment to going to the location to walking from the parking lot to the entryway, walking into the entryway, all of these things are now being incorporated into their expectation. Top-down signaling. It's part of the therapy already before you even show up. The expectation. Top-down signaling. Attention. Now, what do I mean by attention? And, this is a little tricky one. I really need to describe it in more depth, but I'm really just going to put it into a perspective of what are you aware of? What you're not aware of is going to affect you, okay? But if your attention is drawn to something, okay, so I talked about the therapist, how they walk, how they speak, the look in their eyes, how they're dressed. when the client, the guest, is paying attention to that, they're starting to create a feeling, a sensory input that is now becoming part of the top-down signaling. Now, in this one, I'm saying meaning guides interpretation. So we're in a way, we're getting into language and my next bullet point, which is communication. Meaning actually shows up in the expectation. Meaning shows up in the atmosphere, in the environment as they're walking into where they're going. So meaning is very important. And as a therapist, in your communication with your guest, with your client, you want to understand their meaning, not yours. When you express something, you know what you mean. You need to make sure that the guest is also in the same path as you as far as the meaning is concerned. And that meaning is going to guide, and I'm saying it as interpretation, but interpretation could be attention, it could be expectation, it could be all of those things. But it's the way that the person is interpreting everything that they're sensing, okay? Communication, I'm going to get into language a little bit more, but communication is not only language. It is the way you walk. It is the way you speak. It's the tone of your voice. It's your whole presence. It's the presence of the atmosphere in the wellness location or the spa or whatever they're walking into. You know, communication is a sensory input. That's what our senses are all about. It's communicating with our environment. And so we need to acknowledge what's the communication, how are we trying to express it to bring that guest into what you mean, what your expectations are, even though you need to work with everything of theirs. You also have those, and you have a goal, and you have a focus, and you have a way of working. Okay, so all of this needs to be kind of dissolved into each other, right? It's like the synergy of essential oils. That's what all of this information is. You have it, but it's not separate pieces. You need to make it synergize. And that's your goal here. Now, the nervous system is responding before conscious awareness. This is a big piece of this puzzle, is that when we talk about aroma, when we talk about scent, that's most people understand this, that we respond to scent before conscious awareness, which is very important for survival and protection. And it's not just scent that does that. Our nervous system is taking in information, and we are starting to regulate even before we acknowledge it. We have a conscious awareness of it. Now, this is milliseconds when all of this happens, but it's impactful. It's what's happening. And we need to know that in order to make that unconscious response positive and what we want it to be, again, we need to orchestrate, just like that first frame I did. We need to orchestrate these things so it produces what we are trying to create with our therapy, with the essential oils, with whatever we're using. Now, repeated experiences are going to shape responses. And with essential oils, with any aroma, we know we have memory and emotion. So in the olfactory system, every scent creates an emotion, creates a memory based on how that scent was first exposed or when we first smelled it. There's a memory association. There's a bond between the scent and the memory and the emotion, whether you recognize it or not. So when you recognize it, that little video starts streaming in your brain, right? That's a powerful memory that a scent can trigger. But most emotions and most memories do not have that awareness. We respond to our scent environment without awareness. We may feel uncomfortable when we walk into a room. We don't really understand why. We may not even be aware of how we tighten up. But it could be a scent that we were exposed to that had that negative association to it. Same thing with a positive association, right? And so it's not just scent, it's everything. So if it's a returning guest, most likely they're returning because it was a positive environment, right? Positive experience. And so that memory, that positive experience is part of who they are at that time. It's part of the treatment. So when you are doing a treatment, essential oils, whatever you're using, whatever you do want to consider what you're doing as far as future communication. Think about what you're doing in a way that I'm creating this, positive, whatever it is you're trying to do, whatever the treatment is, you want a positive result. Also consider how that positive result will create a future feeling, a future sensory response. Now, the environment, we talked about the environment. And so let's just take a look at this. Okay. So this is all easy and you can understand this pretty easily. The environment is communicating and influencing the experience. Have I said that enough times? Lighting, color, temperature, visual design. I'll get to other aspects of it in a second here as well. But these are the things as a designer. If your spa, if your wellness center, if your whatever it is you have, this could be your home as well, right? So I'm not trying to get specific about one type of therapy or one type of environment. But you do have to consider whatever it is, wherever it is, the colors are having an effect. There's a lot of, color therapy is a big deal. The lighting therapy is absolutely a big deal in the way that the lights are. You walk into, corporate with those fluorescents. How does it feel? Do you relate it to the fluorescence? Now that we have awareness of that, we mostly do. But it creates an uncomfortable feeling, right? So the environment, lighting, color, temperature matters as well. And then the visual design, the way the shadows and the shapes and everything else. All of that is creating a sensory experience. It's creating therapy before the treatment begins. Now, I told you we'd be getting to a little more about scent and sound. That's why I didn't include it on that last slide. We know how important this is. Sound therapy is one of the more popular therapies being used, with the bowls. It's awesome, isn't it? And sound therapy, we know, is a frequency that is creating a physiological response in the body. Sound is not only creating a feeling through the frequency, that's bottom up. The top down aspect to sound is the way the person feels about that, their comfort zone. And again, this is about memory. Memory, our sound also affects memory. And, it's not, I'm a musician. I was going to say, sound isn't my thing, but sound is absolutely my thing. And as a musician, I'm a rock musician, electronics. And so I'm looking at a groove. And when you're looking at a groove, it's something that you're creating from a physiological perspective, but you're also creating it from an emotional aspect, a memory aspect, even a cultural aspect. And so sound is very important on how that's being designed. It is part of the therapy. It's known to be part of the therapy, but just walking into the space, what does it sound like? Scent, essential oils. Of course it smells. Now, this is one of the things that I like to do as, I do visiting experts. So I bring this into workshops and immersions and experiences. So I do retreats, which can be a few days to, a week. I do visiting expert visitations, which can be, days to a month. And with all of this, what I'm doing is I'm bringing everything that I'm talking about into how I structure my presentations. So with essential oils, I have to be so careful when I explain what I do with essential oils, because everyone has this perception that essential oils and you do this and do this and do this for that and that and that. And that's not at all what I'm doing anymore. That's all part of it. But I'm really doing what I'm describing here with essential oils. So scent is a lot more than the therapeutic properties of an essential oil. And when I do consultations or, wellness menus, things like that, using essential oils, what I'm looking at with the ambient scent is not what essential oils do you need for what scent in this treatment. When you walk into a space that's using all of these different products that all generally have an aroma, it's creating an overall spa scent, overall wellness scent. Due to the products being used, you don't even need to be diffusing anything in the atmosphere. Now, what I like to do, if you want to create, a signature or an overall feeling that you are directing, instead of letting it being random from all the products you use, you can actually incorporate into all your products certain aromas, also having the therapeutic, so you still have diversity, but you're doing it in a way, even with a diffuser, where everything harmonizes and creates one overall scent. I was going to tell you a story about walking into, if I walk up to a receptionist or something like that, and especially when I'm with, a woman, and they'll look at the woman and go, "Ooh, you smell like you were just at a spa." And I'm looking at going, "Hey, it's me," because I'm drenched in essential oils all day long, and these aromas have become related to being in a spa. And so these aromas that are spa-like, you can actually orchestrate. You can actually design instead of letting it be random. And that introductory aroma is creating one of these sensory experiences that we have. Oh, words matter. Words matter. Your language shapes experience. This is it's just being carried over in almost every therapeutic practice now, especially, like I mentioned earlier, self-help, intentions, manifestation, guided meditation. The words that are used are extremely important. And I'm going to go through how to incorporate language into all this. I'm going to give you the systems, basics of a system based on this directed sensory method, and based on everything I'm talking about and the words that you use. Now, in the self-help world, it's always a positive. So if somebody comes in, something simple in aesthetics, I want to get rid of my acne. If you say, "I want to get rid of my acne," and then your response is, "Oh, I'll get rid of your acne," what you're saying is that you have acne. Duh, obvious, right? But what that is a language that isn't creating the expectation. It's not creating the end result. And so you want to direct the language so that it's complete, right? And so when you're talking about acne, you want to talk about, we're working on smooth, beautiful, even complexion. So what you're doing is you're putting the idea of what you want the result in the mind, in the top-down influence, as you're working on the treatment. Instead of talking from what's the problem, you're already within the solution. You're already in the result with your language. Every word you use should direct and be in that response. I know that's difficult. If somebody comes in with acne and you go, "You have clear, beautiful skin," the person's going to look at you and go, "You're crazy. I'm going to leave now. Thank you." So there is a little bit of challenge, but hey, how much fun can you have trying to come up with the right language, right? So we need to understand language, and the words that you use are so important. And as many positive words you can use is where you want to go, because words are directing. Let me bring this up a little closer for you. Words are directing the attention. where do you want the guest's attention to be? Do you want the guest's attention to be on acne, or do you want their attention to be on the end result? The attention is going to shape the perception. The expectation influences response. Communication aligns understanding. The nervous system is always receiving. That's the way this works. So your words are bringing the attention to what you want the final result is. The attention is going to shape the perception. So instead of the guest having a perception of treating acne, you're providing an end result. You're directing, even if it's not aware, right? That below consciousness that we had talked about earlier. Even if you're not aware, the perception is now being directed to clear complexion, right? The expectation is now clear complexion. That means you better get it done, right? It's okay. Because expectation is also that, we understand that you can't, it's not an eraser. So you're not trying to be unrealistic here. You're just trying to create direction, okay? The communication, this is the words that you're using. It has to align with the understanding. So when I talked about meaning, that you have to have a mutually understood meaning behind everything that you say. And then the nervous system is going to respond. This is powerful. The nervous system and the way it responds to language. Let me go back. I want to go back to that. I want to explain that a little bit more. I didn't finish that idea because this is also part of Amir Zar, the suggestible brain. This is also part of what I was saying. Your knowledge, your education without saying a word is creating a physiological response in the person that you're communicating with. So what does that mean? The words you use, it's auditory. So it's another part of nervous system input or another system that creates a response in the nervous system. What you hear, again, memory emotion, the sounds are triggering a memory emotion that is also going to trigger a response in your body. So knowledge, it's been shown that the knowledge changes the person physiologically. Your words are extremely powerful in the way that they change the person's physiology. So your treatment, part of your treatment is the language that you use without a drop of anything, without a rub of anything, without a little massage or a needle, whatever you're doing. The words you're using is already creating the physiological response. And so everything I've mentioned so far is building up to you are tuning the body so that your work as the therapy that you're actually doing becomes so much easier because you're taking all the elements that are going to affect that and you're fine-tuning that already so that the body is going to respond to the treatment itself. Essential oils. Gotta love them. They're amazing. Let me just go through this list a bit. So the essential oils communicate through multiple pathways: the aroma, memory, chemistry, physiology, perception, expectation, and the nervous system receives all of these influences simultaneously. Have I not said that already? When I was talking about top down, everything is happening at the same time. It's synergy. So you need to understand everything that's going on because it's there, it's happening. And rather than letting it be random, you want to, just like a really good essential oil blend, you're developing the synergy, you're creating the synergy, just like the plant creates the essential oil within itself, the secondary metabolites. It's creating a harmonious synergy for its own purposes. Essential oils. Amazing. They're amazing, amazing. I want to say this right at the top that lavender is calming. No, it isn't. I want it to be stimulating. So my language, my setup, my environment, my sound, it's going to be more energetic. So lavender is now a stimulant instead of a calming oil. I want peppermint to be calming. We know it as a stimulant. It's not part of my vocabulary, but people say that. It isn't. It's sedating. It'll put you to sleep. If the conditions are developed around the presentation of peppermint to be a sedative. Language is very, very powerful because we have in our olfactory system, now I've heard it called verbal olfactory cues or olfactory verbal cues. And what that is, I give you lavender and I say stimulating. Without you knowing what lavender is, it's going to be a stimulant. And this has been done in a lot of what we can call evidence-based science, okay? Rachel Hers did some tests that she's a really great olfactory scientist. If you read her stuff, if you want to get into these really interesting ways of fragrance, not just essential oils. I think it was hers where they put, they had a scent and they put vomit as a label on one bottle, Parmesan cheese on another. So the people that smelled vomit were disgusted and didn't like it. The people who had the label of Parmesan cheese thought it was yummy, delicious, and great. Hey, that's Italian, okay? I understand that point. So language is powerful. Well, how you label products, yes. This is what marketing is all about. Marketing is about language directing expectations, marketing directing results. So in a way, you can use this as a thought process that is similar to marketing. So aroma, now aroma here on this list is like an umbrella term. And because aroma affects memory, it affects chemistry, it affects physiology, perception, expectation, and it's all synergizing at the same time. I have a system I've developed to understand essential oils in a more synergistic way that I call the holistic essential oil triad. And so when we look at, it's kind of a Venn diagram, when we look at the olfactory system, because I have pharmacology, which would be more physiological, very, the physical response to the oils, they overlap. So aroma is actually a physical response as much as it is memory, emotion, and everything we generally associate with the olfactory system. So essential oils are aromatic. They do have their physiological, pharmacological binding with receptor response. And the more you know about essential oils, the more your work in this area is going to be effective. Sorry, I just bumped my microphone. That was probably a little ambient sound for you. How did that feel, by the way, when you do that, when I bang my microphone? Ambient sound, not a good one. Conversation here about aroma. Affects memory, chemistry, physiology. So when you're using essential oils, all of this is incorporated. Everything. You want to direct that. You don't want it to be random. It is random most of the time. There are a lot of things we don't know. And this is what I love about essential oils. I think the thing that fascinates me and the thing that I never get jaded, because there is so much information that I don't know. And when you have what your knowledge base that you're using, the more you know what you don't know, the more you can incorporate the I don't know into your therapeutic process. It's kind of cool. I can explain that more. Let's have a class sometime about that. All right. So all the expectation, everything else that's going on there, that's happening. All right. So using the system, directed sensory method as a system. So first you need to define the goal verbally. That's part of the verbal communication. Remember, expectation is already in your guest's head. And so you're defining the therapeutic goal as part of their expectation, as well as what you want to accomplish. You want to frame the story. This is a good one. Why do I say story? Because everything I'm talking about is a story. We can look at it as, you could write a novel about this, right? Everything I just talked about, you could describe in a way that a novel would describe an event or a situation or a therapeutic activity, right? It's a story. So you want to understand it as a story. You want it to have an introduction. You want it to evolve. There's a hero to your story. and then it develops with the solution. You have a final ending. Now, we always hope that the final ending is a happy ending, but hey, sometimes it's a negative ending. We want to try to avoid that. You want to stop that. You want to make sure that doesn't happen. So, story and the plant identity. I'm going to show you how that works when I show you some of the systems that I'm going to, I'll show you how the system works in practice. Okay. So you're introducing the scent, and after your orientation, so the scent is all part of this. Let me bring these up for you. So I keep putting bullet points and then shrinking them. So first, you're defining the therapeutic goal verbally. You're framing a story, and the plant identity, which I said you would, or I will introduce to you in a moment. The scent after orientation is sent. So the orientation is about the expectation, the environment, the sound, everything. And then you want to observe how all of this is coming together so you can adjust and alter your direction. Your observation is so important. Every step of the way, you want to observe everything that I've mentioned. But you're not observing your environment or everything else. You should already be adapted to that and know how people respond to your environment, because that's what you're observing. You're observing how your guest is responding to everything I just mentioned. So here's a few ways that we can use essential oils in directed sensory method. So this is an essential oil directed sensory blend. Okay, we'll go with anti-inflammatory, which is kind of an umbrella term for a lot of things, except for inflammation is definitely part of it. So we want to look at bottom up. Bottom up is the physical properties of the oil to reduce inflammatory signaling. The top down is ease, comfort, softening, whatever words you want to use that relate to creating the idea top down of what is anti-inflammatory. And this would also involve pain, I think. So here's some verbal toning that you can use. You start your therapy, or you could start using this even, as the person's just sitting or lying down, right? As you settle into the treatment, notice any areas of discomfort beginning to soften. So when I talked about acne and creating positive verbal communication, what I'm doing here is, yes, I'm using the word discomfort. But what I'm doing is I'm showing you the end result. The discomfort is beginning to soften. This is what you want the person to pay attention to. Another way of saying that is allow body and mind to relax and let go of unnecessary tension. So what you're doing is you're giving permission. Permission is a powerful verbal communication. You're giving the permission to the guest to let go, because if you did, an evaluation, you may find that the mind is the thing that's creating the inflammation. And you want the person to let go, to release unnecessary tension. Now, you have your essential oils. You've chosen German chamomile. I would actually choose helichrysum for any anti-inflammatory pain relief formula. But German chamomile was a good oil to use, because look at that photograph right there. And when you think of the color blue, what do you think of? Cool, soothing. So blue. By the way, that oil is not German chamomile. That is Cape chamomile, coming from South Africa, one of my favorite oils, because it has the anti-anxiety release of what we know about Roman chamomile. I think I like it even better. But it has that blue, which means coming from the azulines. And that may be cam-azulene. I'm pretty sure. I think it's cam-azulene. And the cam-azulene is a beautiful, beautiful blue color. So what you have in this Cape chamomile, which is Eriocephalus punctulatus, if you need the botanical name. And the blue color, just the color is soothing, because blue, when you think of inflammation, it's red. When you think of cooling, It's blue. Now, peppermint and wintergreen are good for pain relief, and their sense on the nervous system is cooling. And so again, cooling, opposite of heat or inflammation. These are also good for pain relief, those two oils. Now, here's another example. And I told you I would get into a plant identification, which I did, right? I just did. When I talked about the blue, that was identification of the oil. But this, I'm actually going to look at the plant itself. So when we talk about a grounding or anti-anxiety blend, we're looking at the bottom up nervous system regulation, okay? Top down, we want it to be grounding, rooted, supported, steady. These are good language. These are good words to use as the language as well. And so the language is feel the support beneath you. Now, grounding, if that term doesn't quite resonate with your guest, they might not understand. What do you mean grounded? What you're talking about is feel the support the earth is providing. Feel how the earth holds us steady. However you want to phrase that. And again, it has to be what your guest will understand. Your vocabulary is not for you to understand. Your vocabulary is for your guest to resonate and be taken in the direction that you want to take the therapy or the final result in. Now, another one is notice a sense of steadiness and stability. So when I talk about plant identity, I use this a lot. When I think about, I don't know, if you want to talk chakras, it could be the third chakra and, you know, your kind of your power center in a way. And if somebody feels insecure or unsteady, when I use the wood and I look at a tree, you know, I'm in the Pacific Northwest. We have these tall, steady, strong trees, except when the wind comes and blows them down. But that's another story. We won't get into that. But hey, they're steady, they're strong, they're there. And what the wood represents, like Cedrus atlantica or Atlas cedar, Virginia cedarwood, these come from the wood. And that wood, to me, looking at the plant identity, represents the strength and sturdiness of a tree. You can use that in your vocabulary, you know, just like exactly what I just said, which is what I use. The other thing you can use is vetiver is a great example of this, which I have at the bottom here. Vetiver comes from a root. And when you look at this image, you can see how grounded that root structure provides to that tree. That is the image. That's a plant identity. And the image you want to pass on to your guest, somebody who has a lot of anxiety. You know, that's like, or like this. So you want to go root that down, pull it down into the ground and give that person a little more steadiness based on the identity of what a root means. You're rooted, you're grounded. Now, these are some of the other words, feel the support beneath you, notice a sense of steady and stability with each breath. Now, this can be breath work or this could be anything, because if you do breathing in your treatment, with each breath, sense feeling of ease and a steady mind. This is the anti-anxiety terminology that you want. And sense feeling is positive, it's going on now. You're not reducing anxiety. What you're doing is you're creating a sense of ease. And you have that now, right? This is where the beauty of essential oils. You can do these therapies, and when you have this therapeutic properties, you can send the person home with that. I should talk retail sometime about the power of what you're actually doing. So here's the vetiver, root oil representing stabilization in earth, like I said, lavender. Now, why do I put lavender there? I'm not talking lavender because we know it's good for central nervous system calming and all the things that lavender is associated with. Lavender is a great oil. That's why it's so popular. I just said why I'm using lavender. That's why it's so popular. If you say lavender to anybody, they go, oh, it's calming. It's easy. Yeah, okay, cool. Because you know that. Just the idea of lavender is going to produce that calming activity. So the reason I use lavender here is not because of what we know or not because of the actual properties of lavender, but because of the idea and the perception of lavender. That is a directed sensory response. So just to kind of put the whole story together here, what the directed sensory response is, or directed sensory system or method is. Intention sets direction. Intention is important. The story frames expectation. The story starts from the person's expectation. It starts from the atmosphere, the ambient sound, the scent, the presentation of the therapist. That's your story, okay? So the story is framing the expectation. Now, structure organizes sequence. So the way I presented all this information was a sequence that you have to understand, and the structure. So the structure is already in place because the person does have to arrive and they do have to walk into your space. And once your methods are, organized in structure, you want to consider how the structure is affecting that sensory response. And then scent anchors the system. Why did I just mention retail? Let me tell you why. Retail is powerful. I owned a spa, and, forever being in the spa industry, and especially in the hair industry, because I was a hairdresser, and it's not common enough to be an esthetician. Hair's cool though. Anyway, it's not what we're talking about. I never understood why therapists do not sell retail. They're hesitant. They don't want to push, I don't want to push products on you. I don't want to. Can I say it? That's kind of lame. You are working so diligently with everything I just talked about to create a positive experience. When you send your guest out the door, you've stopped your therapy. Now they're victims of their environment. They're going back to exactly what created the problem that they needed you for in the first place. Whatever products you use creates an emotional memory bond through the scent. Also the texture and the scent and the visual and the whole thing. But I'll stay with the aroma because that's really the more powerful. The whatever you're giving them to take home should be part of your therapy. So what you want to do is you want to send your clients home with the therapy or continued therapy that you were just doing. And that's, the products and the ingredients and, all the physical properties of what you're giving them, that should go home with them. But the aroma is where it's really powerful. I put everything into skincare. I learned this very early on, as a hairdresser, right? I talked about hair for like 2 seconds, and then I start talking about your digestive system or your emotional health or whatever. And this is when I was early on with essential oils. And I give my clients a bottle of, whip up something and give them a bottle and they take it home and they come back and I say, well, how did that work out? And they go, hey. I said, well, did you use it? And they go, hey. And I read this book, Nancy Etkoff. This was in late 90s, I think she wrote this book. It is still, and maybe even more relevant today. It's called Survival of the Prettiest. It's the biology of beauty. It had such a powerful impact on me. And, I don't know if I'm getting it exactly right when I say this, but to me, it said that beauty and health are synonymous. So if I make a little blend because they have anxiety, and that anxiety is affecting, I'm a hairdresser, so it affects their scalp and their hair in a negative way. And I go, here, you need to use this blend so that, reduce your anxiety and whatever else so that your hair will be stronger. And then they don't use it because it's some familiar weird thing sitting on their shelf. So what I did after reading that book, making that same blend for the same purpose, and I hand it to them. I say, this will make you more beautiful. And I tell them it's just massage it on. So I'd make it in a way that becomes a skin serum. And this is a system that I also developed when, I co-founded a skincare company, one of the kind of pioneering the whole plant-based skincare thing in the US. And I developed it around creating an emotional impact, not only a physical feeling on the skin or, the therapy that I'm trying to do, healthy skin, but also the aroma. in the way that it reduces tension, it reduces stress. It might even help your digestive system, your liver, your respiratory system. You can do that in skincare. So here, it'll make you more beautiful. This is what you need to send people home with. Now, the aroma of that experience, when you send them home with that, especially if you're an esthetician, because skincare is something everyone does every day, right? And they're putting this on. The aroma is going to trigger the positive memory association that they had with you. It's going to trigger the intention that this is whatever you told them. Gets rid of my acne or gives me clear complexion. I went negative on you there for a second. So you can see how important it is to continue the directed sensory method, sending the people home with your therapy. Retail is so important, but don't think of it as retail. Think about it as continued therapy, because that's what you're doing. Okay. Hey, that's all I got for you today. So like I said earlier, this is what I do. If you bring me in as a visiting expert or to do retreats or whatever, I bring these systems into everything that I do. And if you'd like to find me, there's, my at jimharrison.com, I have like 3 different emails that get me. I started out with support, but this is info. Either one will get me. Info is really easy to remember. The QR code, I think, goes right to my calendar. Now, this system it's all about you. You just have to remember how that is. It's all about you. And so I am going to continue doing these things. Let me see if I have any comments happening here. I need to press different buttons, don't I? Hey, I do have some of you guys showing up. When you create and develop a spa, you experience it. Yeah. I mean, you're talking all things. Karen, sensory. When you create and develop a spa, you experience it, full body feeling it. Yeah, you're doing everything I just talked about. Yes, 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 and yes. And you need to control it. So that's exactly what I'm talking about here. In that, you are in control. Directed sensory method is all about you and the control that you want to bring to your therapy. I so appreciate you guys. I just so appreciate you showing up, joining me. Any questions, anything, just, email me, check me out. I'm here for you. So thank you very much. And I will see you on my next round.